Glad to be with you today. My name is Derrick James. I'm Director of Government Affairs for Amtrak in the Midwest, and that obviously includes the great state of Wisconsin. Wanted to just be present to talk to you guys today, give you an update about what's going on at Amtrak, especially in light of the recently passed Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Talk to you about Amtrak plans, talk to you about our partnership with the state of Wisconsin, our very, very successful partnership with the state of Wisconsin. I think comments that were made earlier today commented on my friend Arun Rao, who is the rail manager for rail passenger programs at Wisconsin DOT. And yes, he is absolutely a dynamo. And you guys have in the state of Wisconsin a very, very accomplished and dedicated public servant there. We certainly enjoy working with Mr. Rao, and he and his team, he and his superiors at the state DOT have his back, and great things are happening with passenger rail in Wisconsin, and we're certainly glad to be a part of that. You guys, many of you have been at this for a very long time, but I always like to just give a really brief primer on Amtrak so people understand sort of where we've been, what we've been through, and how we got to where we are today. As many of you know, Amtrak has just celebrated 50 years of existence. We were created by an act of Congress in 1970 to take over operation of the private freight railroads. I know there was some mention earlier today about Appleton having been on the passenger rail map, and I think I may stand corrected, but I think Appleton may have had service right up until the first day of Amtrak service back in 1971 with Chicago and Northwestern passenger train service up to Green Bay and beyond. Unfortunately, when Amtrak was put together, the U.S. Department of Transportation decided what the initial route map was going to be of new Amtrak service, and the Chicago, Milwaukee, Green Bay, Ashland route was not included, so at that time Ashland lost passenger train service. But that be as it may, we have taken great pains over the last 50 years, especially the last 15 years, to really turn the passenger rail network around. Just prior to the pandemic, we broke a ridership record. We carried 32.5 million customers, and that was in 2019. We serve over 500 destinations across the U.S. And 3 Canadian provinces, bringing in several $billions of revenue annually. Part of that vision for improvements is really doubling down and being better at customer service. We know that folks have a choice when they travel every day, and many of us, we love the sort of pleasure and nostalgia of the train, but for the train to be really successful, it has to be a service that can be utilized by everyday people and frequently. I know there's talk of, we discuss tourist attractions and special events, but the Hiawatha's success comes from everyday people who ride the train regularly. If you go out to I-41, you'll see there's lots of traffic out there. Even on a day like today, it was mentioned, today's not necessarily a work day in the traditional sense, but people are going places. People are going to visit family and friends, they're going on trips, they're going shopping. So the train, we must have service that is able to provide a level of accommodation for folks who want to do all sorts of trips. So we've been committed to improving our service. We also know that the United States, the country is changing, and that we've got a cohort of folks that are here, that are coming along, that are going to be our travelers of the future. And those are the millennials. They're the biggest generation in the US, making up a quarter of the population. We know that in general, they like to drive a little bit less. They like to stay connected, and they have until they've been concentrated in urban areas. Of course, we've seen some pretty dramatic changes in the past couple of years dealing with the pandemic and some upheaval. We think those trend lines are still going to be prevalent, that folks like to get together. They like to be together and value those experiences with each other. And they're also more environmentally conscious. And we think that rail brings something to the table with the service that we'd like to see. We think it brings more to the table to attract these new customers. So again, for those who may not be as familiar with us, I indicated that prior to the pandemic, we'd set new ridership records and financial performance. We were well on our way to, in the fiscal year 20, we were expecting to have an operation that required no net operating subsidy. And that's operating subsidy. There will always be capital infrastructure that's needed. I've heard some references to the Northeast Corridor needs a lot of capital dollars, and that is certainly true. But in terms of operating the system, we were getting close to break even. Of course, the pandemic upended that. We need to begin to build the system back and work towards that again. We think that the success that we've had over the past decade or so in getting both federal and state support for Amtrak initiatives, both to operate trains and both to invest in the capital, we think that success in getting policymakers to buy into it is because of the improvements that we've made, not only in service, but in our financial performance. We've started to demonstrate that we can be trustworthy stewards of the taxpayer dollar. And Congress showed that throughout the pandemic in terms of the pandemic relief that they provided us to keep the trains going, even though ridership had dropped off dramatically. And ultimately, in the passage last year of the bipartisan infrastructure law that was signed into existence by President Biden in November, that provides unprecedented funding for passenger rail expansion. So the pandemic, as I mentioned, ridership did plummet during the height of the pandemic. We were carrying as few as 3% of the number of people that we had carried before. We had to take action to manage our finances. That included separations of employees, both voluntary and involuntary. There were pay cuts. And then we reduced services. Not only did we reduce the frequency of services, we reduced train length and we reduced services on board the trains to manage within the dollars that we had. And we're still attempting to claw back from that. Ridership is returning. Prior to the recent Omicron dip, we were at about 70% of pre-pandemic levels in ridership. But our recent numbers show that as we come out of this Omicron wave and mask mandates are lessening and infection rates are in decline, that ridership is coming back, and we're excited. We have been adding services back. I saw in the chat room somebody asked about the Hiawatha services. And this coming week, all 7 daily round trips of the Hiawatha will be back in service again. We have been taking steps to make sure that folks feel comfortable on the train. We've been disinfecting trains at our stations. We've put up plastic barriers on board in the cafe cars. We've required masks. We've made sure that hand sanitizers were available, and our filtration systems were operating at top snuff, if you will. In terms of with our employees, we are at a very high rate of vaccinations for our employees. And for those employees who are not able to get vaccinated, they have to be tested regularly. We've made changes in the travel experience using the technology that's available so that folks can do more touchless booking of tickets. Somewhere north of 90% of our tickets, our customers use non-interactive tools to actually acquire their tickets. Going to the ticket office to purchase a paper ticket from a ticket agent, from a customer service rep, is very much in the minority of how most customers acquire their tickets. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't need to have employees at facilities to answer questions of customers and to assist folks, but now they have more time to do that because they're not handling tickets as folks move to our mobile app and to online tools and by phone. So I heard that one of your members made mention of travel going out to the East Coast, and if Amtrak has somebody that plans for the future. Absolutely, we do. We are bulking up our planning team. We have a vice president of marketing and planning who has overseen the development of our Amtrak Connects Us plan, which is our plan for growth. This is the plan that we begin to present to the Congress over the last year and a half or so. Mayor Woodford made a comment. He indicated that he was one of the signees to the Mayor of Green Bay's letter to the congressional delegation saying, we more money for rail. And we thank the civic leaders in the Fox Valley for doing that. They joined mayors and business community and advocates and environmentalists from all over the country over the last year, making the case that if the Congress was going to pass legislation to bolster the American economy to pull us out of this pandemic, that it should include unprecedented dollars for rail. And it did happen. The infrastructure bill that the president signed in November has $66 billion in it for rail and Amtrak infrastructure. As he said there, it's a once in a lifetime generation to really pump money into this mode to get us to where we need to be as a nation with not only a high quality air and highway system, but a high quality rail system as well. So that Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, that's the official name of the bipartisan infrastructure law. It had $550 billion in new infrastructure spending and $66 billion of it for rail. Most of the money, or about half of the dollars, will go to the Federal Railroad Administration to be administered as grants to states and Amtrak to bulk up and expand passenger rail service. The other half of the money will go, of that $66 billion, will roughly go to Amtrak for investment in infrastructure that we actually own. So that's stations like Union Station in Chicago, or railroad track that we own, like in the state of Michigan or around New Orleans, or of course the Northeast Corridor, to upgrade our technology, to continue to invest in stations to make all of our stations accessible. We're spending about $125 million a year on station upgrades. Those of you who in Wisconsin, if you've been to the Portage station, will see that a brand new platform was constructed at Portage that is length of train and that allows for smooth boarding and is well lit. Same thing is coming to other stations like Toma and Columbus. Here's not to get too wonky for you, but for those of you who are interested, here is the breakdown in the appropriations for rail in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Amtrak's funding comes to us in two different categories. It comes as capital funding, and then it comes as operating funding. The appropriations in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is primarily for capital expenditures. And capital is to build track, upgrade stations, buy rolling stock. We are going to, on the left column there, you can see $30 billion is allocated for funding of passenger rail in the Northeast Corridor. $6 billion of it will go to Amtrak for things like upgrading catenary, upgrading stations. And then below that, you'll see an orange box. That's a reference to one of the federal grant programs, the Fed-State Partnership for Intercity Passenger Rail. That's going to be funded at not more than $24 billion. Those are the funds that will be available if states and Amtrak go to the feds seeking grant dollars. Since the majority of usage on the Northeast Corridor is actually not Amtrak, but commuter rail authorities, that's why that partnership is really important, because any upgrades to the Northeast Corridor not only benefit Amtrak trains like the Acela and the Northeast Regional, they benefit commuter trains that use it around Washington, and Philadelphia, and Baltimore, and New York, and Boston, and Haven. So the states have a role to play as well, so that the feds aren't the only ones spending money on the Northeast Corridor. In the center there, there's some multi-purpose funding. There's $3 billion set aside to eliminate grade crossings, which helps passenger rail immensely, also helps freight rail. And then below that, there's what's called CRISI. That's the Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvement Grant Program. That is also available to freight railroad expansion as well. What's most important to us in the Midwest is the column on the right that says dedicated NN funding. NN means the national network. That's what Congress designates all of the Amtrak network outside of the Northeast Corridor. $16 billion will come directly to Amtrak. Again, that'll be for us to buy new trains, upgrade stations, and upgrade our technology and our maintenance facilities and the like. But what's really key for services like what we're talking about that would serve Appleton, Green Bay, expansions that we want to see to Eau Claire and Madison, there's the Fed-State Partnership for Intercity Rail. Over the next 5 years, there is guaranteed funding of at least $12 billion. Those are funds that will be available for states and Amtrak to apply for to expand and add new passenger train routes on the national network. And we want we want to partner with Wisconsin to add new routes that I will show you in the state of Wisconsin. So, talking about our vision for the future, and I talked about Amtrak Connects Us. You can go online and actually look up Amtrak Connects Us and see the vision that we would like to see in terms of expanded rail. We want to bring passenger train service to 160 new communities. That's on top of the 500 that we also serve. Those new communities include Appleton, Oshkosh, Fond du Lac, and Green Bay. We think that the expansion of passenger rail service will deliver $195 billion in additional economic opportunity. Again, I heard in the discussion this morning talking about the subsidy. Yes, some of these services will require some operating support to cover the difference between what it costs to run the train and the actual ticket revenue that we bring in, but that's okay. You got to change the language. To investment in passenger rail is exactly that. It's an investment. You may invest some taxpayer dollars to run the trains, but the economic impact that the additional mobility brings to your communities and to your state over and above surpasses the small amount of taxpayer support that's needed. So just like Interstate 41 does not make a profit, but I bet you that all of the businesses, the hotels, and the communities that are accessed by that benefit economically because of the state investment in that road. And the same thing happens for passenger rail. The Milwaukee business community understands that. That's why they are so foursquare with the legislature behind the operating and capital support that's needed for the Hiawatha services. So they get it. Investments in some government services do actually generate economic return for the consumer. Also, of course, we'll generate many additional jobs, not only at Amtrak, but in the supplier industry and in industries that will receive that from folks that are traveling to conduct business. And of course, rail is much more energy efficient and better for the environment. The lens through which we looked at our plan for growth was looking at where the population is in the United States. Of course, the Great Lakes region, a lot of folks, it's my home, it's your home. Population has been stable to slowly growing, but still millions of people live in the Great Lakes, and we think we can deliver a lot more service to be of value. But also there are parts of the country where they weren't as populous when Amtrak was founded 50 years ago, and we're still running just a few trains in places like Texas and Georgia and Arizona. We think that there's room to dramatically grow the value and the presence of Amtrak in those places by adding new trains in places like Texas and Florida and Georgia and Arizona. So again, I talked about the new communities, we want to add 39 new routes. We want to enhance 25 of the existing routes like the Hiawatha service and add stations all over the country so that passenger rail becomes not something that folks think about maybe as an afterthought, but it becomes, hey, I have a trip to take. I think let me look and see if the train is there. And if the services are there, if the frequency is there, more folks will ride the train. So Great Lakes region I talked about, it's my home, it's your home. Here's the map of the proposal that we would like to see. This is our vision initially for expansion that we'd like to see in the Midwest. The black lines represent the existing Amtrak network. You can see they're going through Wisconsin, of course, the Hiawatha service, and then heading off towards Columbus, Portage, and La Crosse. There's the once-a-day Empire Builder. The gold lines represent, the gold overlays on the black lines represent routes that we already have corridor-style services that we want to add and enhance those services. So Chicago to St. Louis, Chicago to Carbondale, Chicago to Milwaukee, to Chicago Grand Rapids, and on. We want to add additional train service on those routes so there are departures throughout the day, making the train a real viable and convenient option. The light blue lines represent routes that we do not serve today, yet we would like to add service. So there's your Fox Valley service there through Fond du Lac, Oshkosh, Appleton, and Green Bay. You can also see, as indicated, we want to extend service over to Watertown with additional stops. I'm sorry, over to Madison with additional stops in Watertown and Economawalk or possibly Pewaukee, as well as The Eau Claire region, Eau Claire, Chippewa Falls, and Menominee, those are growing regions of your state that we think quality rail service makes sense. And then let's not forget our friends up at the Twin Ports, Chicago to Duluth, with a stop at Superior. So this is the route network that we'd like to see. This is the route network that we want to partner with these states to go after those federal funds. Because again, the growth of these routes will depend on partnerships with the states. The federal government will not give the money just over to Amtrak. They will give it to us in partnership with the states to develop these routes. We've had success, as you guys know, in several regions. Of course, the Hiawatha service is a great success. Arun and his team have worked with us to build that route up with 7 round trips a day. We are working with Canadian Pacific on what's going to be needed to take that up to 10 trains a day. The state of Virginia is another aggressive state in terms of expanding passenger rail service with additional frequencies coming to Roanoke, which we just started new service at a few years ago, as well as to Norfolk with new frequencies to Newport News, and expansion to the western part of the state to a place called Christiansburg and Blacksburg, where I think Virginia Tech is located. So those are just some examples of successful partnerships. So Amtrak continues to invest. We are, with the dollars that we've already had, so this is with funds that we had, we are buying 83 new train sets for use in the Northeast and connected state-supported services. Those trains will be primarily diesel powered. There will be options to have some trains that are dual powered, either with catenaries for operating under wires or battery powered for once they leave, once the batteries are sufficiently charged. So again, the green option there. There's an option with the manufacturer to actually buy additional train sets over and above the 83 train sets that we're ordering, and that is to accommodate expected growth that we'd like to see in partnership with other states. Of course, we've got our new Acela train sets that we're testing that we hope to have in service once business travel returns next year. Those trains will have the capability of going 165 miles per hour on sections of the corridor that we're able to upgrade to that speed. And of course, I mentioned millennials love, sustainability and climate is important to them. You have less environmental impact when you're traveling by train. The mayor mentioned that. You reduce your emissions, you're reducing fuel, which is so important in this era of sort of unstable fuel prices. Safety is important to us. All of our system is operating with PTC on it, or PTC equivalents, and that includes our routes that operate over the freight railroad system. And we are making enhancements to the service. Those enhancements will keep coming. I think you may have seen we announced that we are refreshing the interiors on all of our long distance trains. This is temporary because we fully expect that we're going to be putting together a team to start to chart out what is the next replacement for our superliners. The superliners, the first orders of those came in the 1970s. It's about time for them to be retired. We're continuing to upgrade our stations. We're making enhancements to our food service. We would like to continue to expand the freshly onboard prepared food services that exist on our western long distance trains to some of our eastern long distance trains. So, and then of course the technology that I talked about, new quick track machines are being deployed across the system, our mobile technology, to really allow the customer to sort of take charge of their trip. So that's a picture there. I think mention was made that a couple of weeks ago, we announced that all the funding was in place for the TCMC service. That's the media event that we had at the La Crosse Amtrak station. I'm not in the picture because I'm taking the picture, but the tall gentleman on the left there is the president and CEO of Amtrak, Stephen Gardner. To his right, the African-American gentleman is the vice president of operations for CP. And then, of course, the gentleman speaking at the podium is your Wisconsin DOT Secretary, Craig Thompson. So quite a celebratory event. It was great to be there.